Welcome to the Period Besties Podcast with Stasha and Katie. Think about it as chatting with your best friends about all the TMI stuff you've never talked about before with two period coaches who've been helping hormones collectively for over 20 years now. I'm Stasha.
And I'm Katie, and we're pulling back the curtain on what it's like in the world of menstrual coaching. From puberty to menopause and everything in between, we're here to show you how period coaching can save the day. We'll share practical tips and information you can put to immediate use to improve your hormones and happiness.
We're removing the mystery, ending the taboo, and shining a light on just how powerful period coaching can be.
So whether you need period coaching or are considering becoming a period coach yourself, these episodes are going to help you. We'll share stories, coach live on air, and bring smart, savvy guests to share their wisdom too. Let's start today's episode.
Amazing. Welcome to Period Besties Podcast. Today, we are getting to chat with Monifa Harris, who is a good friend of mine and who actually joined Katie and I for the Business of Birth Control premiere in Los Angeles. So that was a lot of fun.
Super fun.
Yeah, too much. It was great. What a fun day. So we brought her on today because not only is she just brilliant in and of her own right, doing Vocal Academy and helping people actually use their voice and powers for good and step into leadership roles. She's also a period coaching school graduate, so she does it all with flow. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to bring her on and chat about leadership and visibility and flow. So thank you for being here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for inviting me. I am so honored. You guys are amazing. And I'm just glad to be in the conversation and in the room. So thank you so much.
Oh, we love it. We're just happy to have you here. So kick us off. Tell us who you are, what you do.
I am Monifa Harris. I call myself the Vocal Alchemist. So I help people to use their voice to heal and transform, whether that's on stage or their own life or in life to change their life. So it's really something that is just a deep passion of mine that helps people to anchor in so they can see where they're actually going and what they're creating.
It's such a powerful place and stance to be from. So we're going to have to ask you how you got into it. Now, I know you're an opera singer, but how did you segue from there to here?
Wow. Actually, it was weird because the day I met you was at that conference, and it was in that conference that I had this epiphany during the meditation that I had come to learn about building a business so I can make a crystal business thrive. And so I can eventually have sound bowls, and I'm selling $1,000 sound bowl sets everywhere. And then I'll teach them how to use sound to heal and transform. Does that sound familiar? So I had the aha that I was like, you don't have to wait till that happens. You can just tell them how to use their voice to do that. And I was just like, what? Why didn't I think of that before? I have a master's degree in opera performance. I don't know. Yeah, so that was it. It was like kind of just like, duh, but it was obviously a self-block. I was like, nobody's going to buy singing as transformation, right? And so, as I go now, I see people out in the world doing different versions of that. And I'm just like, why did I think it was so weird? But it is hard when you're the first one out there, so I'm sure you know about that. So that is really the reason why I got this far. And then it was really about helping people to understand that you really you can't know where you're going unless you know where you are, right? And it's very important for us to be connected to our bodies and our voices so that when we are using them, that they're deriving the outcomes that we've decided to use them for. A lot of times we're using voice as a defense mechanism, and we're using it as a please love me mechanism. And they're using it as a please see me mechanism instead of just saying and being who we are. And so what happens is that it confuses people's information, and it confuses audiences, and it confuses the message. And so I really help people to get those things in line so that we can have the impact that we're looking for. And it's actually less work, but a lot of us, that's the challenge. Right there is the challenge, is that we expect it to be hard. And we expect to work hard. We expect it to hurt. That's the real thing I feel like we're fighting against in this industry, is that people expect things to be hard. And when they're not hard, they're confused. And when they are hard, they're frustrated. So it's interesting, but I've always loved to teach. And so this is just my ideal teaching platform in my opinion. Yeah.
I love that. Can we talk about you being an opera singer for a second?
Sure.
That's incredible. And I mean, I've been to the opera a few times, and just the voices that come out of opera singers, you're just like, I'm always just in amazement. Because you have to really be embodied, I really feel like, to be an opera singer. And obviously that translates to what you're doing now. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that experience. So unique.
Absolutely. I highly recommend anybody that hasn't been to a live opera to go, because it's mind-boggling when you think about all the technology it takes to do what people do, like with their bodies and just naked life, as compared to like with a mic and on a stage, right? So, and then that feeling, especially, if you can actually get into one of they used to call them chamber concerts, but like a smaller room with a voice like that, you can feel the voice on your body. I love it. I love it to death, right? And yes, it takes a full embodiment. Another thing I recommend is if you ever go to an opera, go backstage. They love it. Very few people think to do it because they just think of opera singers as, hoity-toity, but you'll go back and meet some of the most visceral personalities you've ever met in your life, right? You think like Broadway is like, out there, and I would say Broadway is like ecstatic, like they're very moving and they're probably singing backstage and all this stuff. Like opera singers are like they're visceral, like they will do things, right? and it's so fun to be able to talk about it, because it is one of those things where you really have to just give your body up and then the sound happens, right? But a lot of people think that we're like making all this sound happen. And they're like, how can you make all that sound happen for an hour and a half? And they're like, because we don't make it, we let it happen. And the more you let it happen, the less you actually have to do, the more you just have to kind of hold on to your britches and just keep conscious and cognizant of what's you want to create and what's next. So it really it's truly art as life, right? It really becomes just circular versions of those things within the operatic dynamic, because you're not just doing the singing, you're also creating the music with the conductor and the orchestra and the other singers on the stage. And the reason I loved it so much was because I have I'm not diagnosed, but I'm starting to recognize things. Have a little ADHD, a little dyslexia. I wasn't able to track my thoughts a lot. And so the only thing where I felt like there's enough going on that I could actually focus was opera. So it's the only time I could not get out of my head. In other words, I couldn't think too much because there was too much going on for me to overanalyze everything, which is my tendency to want to be in control of everything. So that's my opera story. So it was hard because I was really shy, but I really wanted to be a part of the music. I really wanted to be a part of that music happening. And so I just kept going. And it taught me most of my life lessons, because it was the only thing I was really worth fighting for at that time, And then I realized, I can have this experience in my own life, like without being on a stage and like risking everything in front of thousands. Okay, let me try that instead, right? I'm an introvert, so like it's definitely, the performance part was really just proving that I could do life. And then, but I really did. My favorite part was being in the practice room, learning something new about my voice, being able to do something new with my voice and realizing that everything was kind of stemming from the same process, which is how I developed the Omans method. Yeah.
So cool. How do you discover? I'm asking because when I was a child, I wanted to be a singer, and how that obviously didn't happen. But how do you discover that you have a beautiful voice and using that? Because that's like such a throat chakra and expression. And how does that happen to know that you have a voice that's going to be on stage?
Wow. Yeah, that's a big question because I don't think there's a way to actually know. I'm trying to think the only way that you would know is if like your parents told you, or if your family said, or if some stranger on the street stops you, right? But what I found is that most people have never gotten that affirmation. Most singers are actually in rebellion of somebody's opinion about their voice. And so it's very interesting because, yeah, I don't think anybody ever gets full permission to use their voice, which is why I feel like it's so important for me to give people permission and everybody permission, because most people don't know how to sing. And it's this weird idea. And I feel like it's the same idea that we perpetuate in the world of this, like, well, either you're good at it or you're not. Leave it to the talented, leave it to the beautiful, leave it to the successful, leave it to the ones that are actually going to get somewhere, right? It's really sick. And so I'm trying to help people understand there's no way to just kind of roll out of bed and say, I'm a singer, right? Just like anything, it takes, if you really want to be a professional singer, it takes skill building, it takes time, and it takes, real goal setting and real application. So it really is something that we get to choose to become. It's not something that we just are. And I know there's a lot of young singers. Again, people think that they are just kind of born that way. And it's never true. Usually they have parents or like aunts, uncles, church they've been singing with since they were children, like babies. As soon as they start vocalizing, they vocalize before they talk, right? So they are already imitating what's going on around them. And then some just get more affirmation for it, just like any genius. They just get more affirmation early. They get really good feelings from it. So they do more and more and more and more. But it's never just pure talent. It doesn't work that way. Yeah.
I like one of the things that you said was that you don't make it happen. And I feel like that's the menstrual cycle, right? You don't make it happen. It's happening. So you either go with it, but you can't force it. It's not like you can sit down and go, I'm going to have my period today. Boom. I'm done with follicula. I'm ready to be luteal today. Boom. Like you can't make it happen. It flows. And as you were describing that process of like, you can't make it happen. You have to use it. You have to let go. You have to let it flow. It's part of the process. And it's practice, right? Like you practice working with your menstrual cycle. You practice eating with your cycle. You practice supporting your cycle. You practice vocalizing. You practice singing. You practice and you learn things as you go. Oh, I'm better at this time than that time. I was going to ask this later, but let's just segue into it while I'm on the roll. Your voice changes with your cycle. So hitting that note in this phase would be different than a different phase. So fill us in a little bit on that.
So on point. This is another thing that I think people are often thrown by, is that they'll have really bad voice days, right? And it's very much like having a bad luteal day. It's coming from the same places. It's that the tissues swell and there's a little bit more activity in the nervous system. And so things are operating differently. And especially for like something as precise as operatic singing, like it literally changes how and when to do certain things. And so it changes your timing, it changes your rhythm, right? And so that's what really affects you as a singer, as a vocalist, as a speaker as well, because people will notice that they don't have the power of their voice when they're speaking, or they don't feel like they feel like they're kind of like trying to sing through or speak through a wall. And that happens a lot during late luteal and menstrual because those tissues are so enlarged. And so a lot of people do things like take aspirin before they sing so that it'll at least bring down the tissues, but it's still a different feeling. It's a different feeling to sing. So a lot of women will have in their contracts to not perform during that part if they can, right? So if they're at that level, if they're like in an A house, yeah, if they're diva enough, they'll say like, I will not sing during this part of my cycle. And, they have that. Usually they'll have somebody as a backup or a second singer if it's possible that it will be during that time.
Their moment to shine.
Exactly.
That's so interesting. I had no idea.
Yeah, it really does affect the voice a lot, and people can be really on during ovulation. Like people will kill a performance during ovulation. They'll just be like, "Oh my gosh, she's so dynamic," right? Like it's so, and it's again, a good performer can really activate that energy, and it just leaves everybody tingling, right? And it's really something that people are like, "Oh, she's just that talented," and some people are, but sometimes they're just on, and that's not being just on may seem like a fluke, but it's never is. It's usually a good day plus ovulation plus a good breakfast and really preparing. It's 1,000 different things that makes that on moment happen.
I have a question about that then. When did you discover that? Was that when you were working like part of the school, or is that something that you learn as being part of the opera, like about the cycle and singing? Like, is that something that's just known in that field? I'm so curious.
Like most things, it's kind of like you don't find out until it becomes important to you. It's one of those things that you're just like, why am I breaking in my, above C? And people are freaking out. And then, eventually your teacher's like, in the closed room. So are you on your period today? And you're like, and you're just like, why am I just hearing about this? And then usually they'll recommend aspirin or ibuprofen. So it's one of those things that you kind of learn as you go. And it's interesting that most people don't talk about it. Even voice teachers, they don't often bring it up. So it is one of those things that is still taboo. It's just a matter of if you really are trying to get somewhere, eventually somebody will tell you. It's one of those things.
I think that's fascinating. I remember in college, I went to performing arts college. So we had musical theater majors alongside, actors and dancers. And I remember walking down the hall that had a lot of the voice coaching rooms where the musical theater majors would have their voice professor. And I remember walking by one day and hearing one of the professors go, "Sing, shut up," really loudly and really like with a huge voice, like she was being the example. And I just remember laughing and thinking, okay, that's clearly her way of getting you to your diaphragm, to access that real low diaphragm and pull it up. And I just remember laughing, but then nobody ever said anything about the menstrual cycle. Like I dormed with a musical theater major for a while, and no one ever talked about that menstrual cycle. And the same thing in the dance department.
Yeah.
Like
they don't talk about
it. The closest we got was in a Graham class working on contractions. And one of the older students was like, "It's kind of like when you take a tampon out." And I was like, oh yeah, that makes I know what that feeling is. That makes sense. That's what that movement is. It's that very low scooping. Now I get it. But we didn't really, I kind of didn't have a choice. Like the endo was pretty bad at that point. So I would come into classes some days and just be on the ball, and a ball on the floor with a heating pad in the corner. But yeah, it was not something we talked about. And it makes such a huge difference in performing arts. Like no matter what you're doing
really
on stage, your performance is different in ovulation versus menstrual. Just it is
purely. It just it's day and night. And it's so interesting because especially when you look at, especially Broadway, especially especially musical theater, especially dance. You're talking about a performance industry, and the performance industry does not take excuses. And it's almost don't talk about it because they're going to remember that you have a bad day, right? And so it's kind of one of those things you don't get to even talk about, especially earlier in your performance career. You don't get to talk about it. There's no excuses. So menstruation sure isn't one. So it is one of those things. And it's ridiculous, because it's part of being a performer, and it is part of really any performer, honestly. And I think people have good and bad days. And I think it does make sense to see people more than once. There's a guy that was really amazing, or is a really amazing performer up in Sacramento. And if he's interested, he'll go to multiple performances of somebody. And he's like, well, first of all, I'm here to support. But second of all, you never know, because you never know if it was a good day for them or a bad day, or what is good, what is their specialty and what's not their specialty. So it's kind of one of those things. If you really want to know an artist, you have to see more than one instance of their work. And so that is something you have to actually show up for a live performer, right? And they just don't even consider it. They don't, in auditions, they never consider it. It's not like you may get a second audition, but it's only based on how well you did in the first one. So, yeah.
So interesting. So that translates so much to just day-to-day life as well, right? I know I can tell where I am in my cycle and how my brain works, but then also how I can actually speak, right? So
exactly.
When you're working with your clients, walk us through what that looks like when you're connecting leadership, vocals with the cycle. I'm so curious.
Yes. So what I'm actually doing is I'm building their understanding of cyclical nature to begin with. My first thing is always really what is most frustrating about your life right now is usually that I'm trying so hard and nothing's working, right? And so what it comes down to is, well, do you know why it's not working? Well, no, if I knew it was working, I would fix it, because I'm a hard worker. If I knew it was working, I would make it happen, right? And then I was like, okay, so the problem here isn't that you can't make it happen. It's that you don't know what's going wrong. The only way to know what's going wrong is to track your cycle, okay? And so what I'm teaching people really is what a cycle is, and then how to witness the phases of the cycle. So the phases that I talk about in the breath to voice cycle are: breath is in and out. There's only two directions, folks. When we're speaking and singing, is out. Okay. And then the voice cycle, which is initiation, and then it's flow, and then it's breathing in. Yeah. And then it's the rest. There is a pause between both, right? But it's one of those things, like, is it 4 or is it 5? Stasha's answered that question for us. But yeah, that's that pause. And it's really just being able to witness where you are in that creation cycle is what I call it. It's a creation cycle. So it's the same reason why I was like, of course I'm coming to the period school, because it's the original creation cycle, right? This is how we make babies, right? And so if you want to know about how things become, then you need to study creation. You need to study the cycle. And so that's what I'm teaching. I'm teaching them how to pay attention, what it feels like in the body at different points of those phases. And then I model that to the beginning of anything you're trying to create. So whether that's a note or a phrase or a business, there's the beginning of a project, there's when it should be in flow, and then there's when we are in review, like thinking about why did it work, why didn't it work. But in the initiation, so when you start something, there's a ton of energy, right? When you start something, there's a ton of energy to get you started. And then a lot of times our over controllers are like tamping down on that energy and analyzing the out of it, right? So they're just like, I've got to do this. I've got to do this. I've got to do this. And it's going to be, got to be perfect. And it's got to have bells on it with whistles so they know I'm beautiful, right? And it's like 1,000 different things they're trying to get done in that initiation. And all initiation wants is to be let go. They just want, it wants, that energy just wants to be out there. And so when you tamp down on it like that, then you basically are saying that now I have to control this energy throughout the entire cycle. And this is what happens. By the time you get to luteal, by the time you get to the late phase of that breath cycle, that sucker is out of gas. Right? Mm-hmm. Ideally a creation cycle that's going to have a burst of energy. You're just going to let it go. And then it's going to flow. It's just going to be like holding on to your britches. You're just like, okay, we're moving. Okay. Things are happening. Okay. Right. And then when you've done the things, you look back and you say, oh, okay, I see how I could have done that differently. And then you might, ruminate on it, which is really that breath. Just before you get that breath in, that pause, just before you get that breath in, what do I want the next breath to embody? And so that's what people aren't doing. They are not pausing and they are not resting. They're not in a place where they can actually evaluate because they didn't even get a real result because they were tamping down on that energy so much, right? So you can't really know what you're capable of if you're just suffocating that initial energy. It's just going to always have a skewed result, and you're going to be out of consciousness, out of awareness. So you're not going to really be able to track what happened. You can have opinions about what happened, but you're not going to really be present to what happened, And that's why I say, like, people keep missing the mark, is that, honey, you never had good information because it was all based on what you thought was happening. It's not what was really happening. So you got to just see what happens. And then you get to make changes, make adjustments, do things differently, add something on, right? But just let the initial energy go. Yeah.
A bit like self-sabotage, like trying to force, trying to push, trying to make your body respond or your this action happen is a bit of just self-sabotaging right out of the gate. You're diminishing your results before you even started because you're trying, pushing, forcing instead of tapping into what's really happening. Like you said, take that breath. And in that space just before, going, okay, now I'm going to let it go. And I'm going to go where I am with where I am in my cycle, with where I am in my breath. You can't go, okay, well, I'm going to inhale, but you know what? No, that's not what I want to do right now. Instead, I'm going to push and exhale, even though there's nothing left in your lungs. Absolutely. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah, that's
absolutely
genius.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that people don't even know what they're doing it until we break it down. So what happens is that almost everybody has a sticking point, right? A lot of my people, their sticking point is that time just before. They're going a little crazy just before they start making sound. So when they take that breath in, they always hesitate, right? They do this, right? And there's kind of like this tentative sound that kind of maybe is what it was supposed to be, maybe it's not. And so it's like that thing right there is that hesitation, that second guessing yourself, that, oh, am I thinking it the right way? Is this really something I should do, or is it not? All of those things. And a lot of times, especially when we have ideas, like real life ideas, we can really just, like, the first step really is just to write it down, put it down somewhere, or like that by itself is just letting the energy go, instead of thinking, oh, I've got to make it all happen right now. No, just take that initial energy, write it down, honor it, and then see what happens. But don't try to make it into something right now, So a lot of times we're confusing or trying to do all the phases at the same time.
Yeah.
Which is, I know you've seen that, where people are like, oh, well, I'm in my menstrual phase, but I still need to get the strategy done. and it's going to be perfect anyways, right? And so they just try to do everything at once instead of just letting things happen in their timing. And that's another thing, is that they try to force it. So there's other people who are just like, right? They're really kind of jumping the gun because they don't trust that they'll know when it's the right time, or they don't trust that they that it'll be a good outcome. So they're just like, I'll make it a good outcome. And they just kind of bull guard and jump in, right? That's another kind of version. And what happens is that there's a ton of energy at the beginning and then it just gone. I've seen this in businesses too, where people are just like gung ho, they're doing all the things, they've got 1,000 posts a day and and everyone should join me. And then like next year, you're just like, where'd they go?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. And so, but everybody has a tendency. And there's other people, like those people that don't even know rest exists. They're just like, no, we're perpetual motion machines. This is what happens. Like, no, honey. That wasn't even a real thing. Perpetual motion doesn't even perpetuate. Like you have to just, you have to rest at some point. And actually part of perpetual motion is rest, by the way. It pauses. So we have to, when we are recognizing that there's this moment where actually energy will keep traveling without you. That's what people don't trust, is that when you're resting, a lot of times energy will keep traveling without you, which is kind of what's happening in that pause motion when things are on a pendulum swing. At the top of the swing on the left or right side, there's going to be a pause. And it's actually the energy is still going, which is what brings it back down, right? So the energy, that's what allows it to keep going like that. And so you really can have the illusion. So some people know they're supposed to rest, and some people look like they're always going.
Yeah.
And a lot of my people think, oh my gosh, you're doing so much. I'm like, hon, I'm like resting 10 times a day, right? So it may look like I'm doing a ton of stuff, but it doesn't mean I'm always doing stuff.
Yeah. That's so true.
Difference.
It's so true. I remember distinctly when I hadn't marketed the school at all. Like we had the first intake of people that came in. I hadn't done any marketing in months, but I was still getting applications. Like I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't posting about it. It just existed. I wasn't doing anything. I had done the marketing for the very first round, and then I was doing the school with the students. So I wasn't talking about it at all. We had 9 months before I was going to start talking about it again, but I had those applications coming in anyway. And that was when I was like, oh, this is working because I don't have to push to bring people in. That it was a real moment of going, oh, I see. This is how it works. I love that pendulum and that energy continuing to move, even when you're not necessarily pushing that energy out there, but it's actually the receiving. You're on that receiving end of the energy.
Yeah, exactly. It's time to coast, right? Like there is a time when your efforts will carry you. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people just don't trust that will happen.
Yeah, because that's just not something we talk about. It's not something that you learn in school, but without rest, there's no motion. So I love that pendulum swim too, like swing, such a beautiful image. I'm just going to like picture that in my mind next time I'm being like, okay, time to rest. Like, it's okay. It's going to come back. Yeah. I'm going to keep that image.
Yeah.
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like people get really uncomfortable in those pause moments. So when you like at the end of a breath, it's always a pause of that in between. When I tell you to hold, the only reason I have to tell you to hold is because you think you have to always be doing something. Like holding isn't doing something. It's not doing something. But people think, okay, so now people are telling them to hold, and then people are just like clamping down, hold, right? Because they have to do something. They're going to hold by clamping. They're going to make holding, right? Where they're actually just telling you not to breathe in or out, which would happen naturally if you didn't think you had to be doing something all the time. It's so funny that we are doing society. We're doing society. It's really one of those things like, okay, if you just there's a time to stop. And then people get so uncomfortable in those times.
Mhm.
And so because that upward pause, right? When you get up there, it's like free. It's like you're just up there, like you don't know what direction you're going next. That's what it feels like in the body. And so people are like, I need to know, I need to know, I need to know, I need to know. But this is like that, again, deep luteal chaos time where you really don't get to know. And but like the more you force it, the more you're going to choose something that's not for you. And that's what usually people will come down. They'll come down with the thing they held on to when they felt uncomfortable. Not a good idea, because that's basically, if it was if you were uncomfortable and that's when you had the idea, then the idea is born of uncomfortability. Whatever the idea is, it's going to make you more discomfort or disable or dis-ease. Like, it's not a good idea. But again, this is something we have to retrain ourselves out of by starting to take care of and witness our cycles.
Yeah. On that topic, how do you take care of yourself? What is your self-care non-negotiables?
Rest.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious, because when I first met Stasha, I was just like, how do I justify laying down during the day? That was literally where my brain first went. It's like, how do I justify that I'm just going to be in bed and I feel fine, but I'm going to be in bed? How do I justify that? And it was one of those things that I was like, well, you're going to just learn to deal with it. You're going to say that it's happening, and then you're just going to do it. And that's all there is to it. And so that is one of my non-negotiables. And now I'll give you a look if you question me about if I'm laying down, right? If I'm laying down, it's because I feel like laying down. Like, what is the problem? Just, you need a reason? No, you don't, because I don't have a reason. You don't need a reason. I just want to be here. This is where I am.
Really embracing that inner diva.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You have to, right? Because that inner diva is telling you what it takes to be great. That's my opinion. We have something we vilified as taboo, to have this personality of demands. Well, the demand is not necessarily even for the diva themselves. It's for the art that they're creating. That is what the boundaries are about. That is what the demands are about. It's like, if you can't give me what I need to be the artist that I am, then guess what? Then I'm not showing up. So when somebody pulls a diva card, it's not because they were trying to just be a diva. It's because they felt like they didn't have what was necessary to be what you paid for them to be on that stage. And so that is really where you have to be when you're taking care of your body and you're taking care of the things you're trying to create in the world. You have to be in a defensive stance. No, this is what it takes. This is what the resources I need. This is the support I need. This is the environment I need. And this is the nutrient, the resource that I need to make this happen. If you don't have that, then you don't get that. You may get something else. Maybe we can talk about a different agreement, but you don't get that. And if that's what we agreed upon, then I'm sorry, then you just aren't honoring what I need. So I have to leave. And it's so amazing to me, because you hear these stories all the time about women. You never hear the men's stories.
Actually, it was just made me think of this story of, there was a dude, it was like the Rolling Stones or something, where they had no brown M&Ms. I forget exactly what it was, but it is in the contract, and so it came out like, I can't believe what divas these guys are. They have a contract that says that they will not tolerate brown M&Ms in their room or something like that, right? But what turned out was they had that in the contract because they'd played on so many stages that were dangerous. They had played in places where electrocutions and floorboards and all these kinds of things had, because they were young ones and not huge stars, but they realized that they needed to put something in their contract that they could see quickly and easily to know if someone actually read the contract properly, so that they were safe. Not because they were, divas in the bad way because they didn't like brown M&Ms, but because they needed something quickly visual that they could see, that they know that somebody actually read every line of that contract, so that they knew when they went on the stage that it would be set up the way that they asked for, that it would be safe, that it would be an environment that they could actually perform their art in a safe way, because they had so many bad things happen. So it was like this diva moment. That's exactly what you're saying. It was setting them up to be able to perform at their absolute best, but it was just a quick, easy way for them to know whether or not going out on that stage was going to be safe and proper for them, or if there would be potential things. And then they could go onto the stage knowing that they needed to look at it very carefully and make sure that they were able to be set up for that performance, or they could leave because technically they were in breach of contract if they didn't do these stems. So it was, I was like, at first you hear that story and you think, what jackass divas? And then you find out why they did it and you go, oh God, that's brilliant. Asking for what you need in a way to set up so that you can create your art in a safe, supportive environment.
Absolutely. Actually, I think something very similar just happened. And I wish I'm so bad. I can't remember people's names, but it's one of the singers from Destiny Child, like just walked out on a contract for, I think, Good Morning or some kind of morning show.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Today Show. Yeah. Yeah. And it was, some of the commentary about it was the Eminem conversation. And the reason why it was part of the commentary is because they were saying that one of the other people that were on the show that day was Mariah Carey. And not Mariah Carey. I'm sorry, not Mariah Carey, J-Lo. And so whatever the demands that were, in J-Lo's contract, somehow they're saying maybe that the things that the other person required didn't show up because so many resources were going to J-Lo's room. And so it's kind of this thing of, well, am I being respected in the way that I'm being respected? So they said M&Ms, right? But like the original M&M was where I brought it up. Mariah Carey was the original M&Ms, and she would only wanted like white M&Ms in her dressing room. So that was a diva stance. This is why I call it a diva stance. Because now you have to find the only white M&Ms that ever happen in the year, which is sometime around winter, I think. And then you have to plan like a full year ahead, right? And then you have to get them all out in there, right? So it's one of those two things. I find that a lot of those originally were things that were like, okay, no, I value that you're here. So I think it was Aretha Franklin, like she would obviously be getting paid more than that at certain points, but she required $8,000 cash in hand when she showed up.
Yeah.
Like she just wanted them to hand it to her in her hand. Same thing. It came from this idea that essentially people weren't paying her in the beginning. They would ask her to show up. And like, back in the day, it's not like you had a lot of options. You had to drive there or you had a train, whatever. And then they wouldn't give her the right hotel and then they wouldn't pay her, right? So it came from this thing of just knowing that the money is there and otherwise I'm not performing. But it also became, no, cash in hand. I know that you respect that I'm here and that I'm going to perform, right? And it's really sometimes that you just a self-confidence thing. And so one of those things where it's like, when you give me that cash in my hand, I know I'm a diva. And then we can get something done today. And that's really that stance. And I think it's important to have that stance if we want to believe we're going to create something significant in a moment. I think you want to have that sense of power and energy of what you can do and what you're capable of. Yeah.
I love it. This has been a freaking masterclass on boundaries, standing up for yourself, using your voice, being the leader that you are. And this can be in your house, your home, for your clients, for it doesn't have to be on a grand stage. This could be simply just knowing that you are running your own business. For example, you are the CEO, and what does that look like? How are you taking care of yourself properly in this position of helping change the world for the better and creating beautiful art or creating transformation for your clients or whatever it is? It has been fantastic.
No, I love
It's
it.
so
I'm
important in business. It's so
It is.
important.
It is. So we have a lightning round of questions that we like to ask everyone before we end. But before we do that, I want to have you tell everyone where to find you on the interwebs. Where do we go to find you on social media, online, blah, 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 all that good stuff.
Yes. Find me Monifa Harris on YouTube. On Instagram, it's Drama Mezzo. So DRAMAMEZZO. And yes, and I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn. So by either one, you can find me. Just Google it.
Nice. And do you have a free gift for our audience today?
Yes, I do have a free gift. It is the 24-hour voice recovery. So that is something I put together as a little combination of a story and natural remedies you can find probably in your cupboard, if not in your grocery store, that will really help the voice recover in a short time frame. And it's something that I found out when I was told to get it together before I had a performance of Carmen the next day. Because I was losing my voice to allergies, and I had never lost my voice before, but I was in a new city and all that kind of thing. And so, yeah, so these are essentially what I did in order to be ready to sing the next day. And I actually got raving reviews. You've never sounded better the next day. And so, yeah, so it's one of those things. It's actually also a vocal practice that is one of the ways that I introduced the Omans method. So I was actually doing both in order for me to be able to calibrate, to be able to sing the next day. Yeah.
Powerful. And I have to say that I found it very helpful, especially doing like webinars and 5-day challenges and interviews and things where you're back-to-back speaking. I'm not a vocalist, but I found it very helpful just doing a lot of talking gigs in one day, or like being on the road in Australia where I was doing a gig every day and then flying and then doing a gig for 3 days in a row and then flying. So I found it really helpful just for doing that kind of stuff and like running webinars and stuff where you're talking for an hour straight. So yeah, I highly recommend it for people, especially if you're doing presentations, workshops, any kind of thing where you're talking with people back to back. So amazing. Thank you. I love it. Shall we dive into the questions?
Yes. All right. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right. Go with your gut first instinct. What's your biggest craving?
My biggest craving. Pineapple came up. I don't know. That's weird.
Good for the throat.
Yeah.
Good cough suppressant.
I haven't had pineapple in a while. I don't know. Y'all might get some out of the world answers here.
I love it. I bring it on. What do you eat to satisfy your cravings?
My biggest is actually sweet plantain chips. Like any kind of plantain chip, honestly, but sweet plantain chips, especially if I'm having like a sweets craving. Yeah.
What's your favorite way to move?
Oh, I love right now is actually, I'm going to say it wrong, but Qigong, which it's my favorite way because it really invites ease. It invites ease in the joints and the movements, and it invites breath. And I always feel balanced afterward. Yeah.
What's your number one self-care for when you're like super stressed out in the moment?
Number one is voice. I breathe, I release my breath, and then I hum to myself. Sighs are really useful for me, or really low tone. So sometimes I'll just, and it just soothes me, like the vibration. I can feel it in my body. So it's like a somatic response thing that really soothes anxiety for me.
I discovered that helps cramps when the endo flares get bad. Sometimes doing that low rumble in my chest will help pull a layer of cramps off. So it's one of the tools in my toolkit for pain management, actually. I love it.
Yeah.
What music do you listen to when you're working?
I have very sensitive hearing. So if I'm listening to music when I'm working, it's usually some kind of meditation music, some kind of just amorphous sound that just kind of goes through with no intention whatsoever. Yeah.
Favorite country or place that you visited?
That's not fair. Okay. I love to travel. Greece is going to be the answer. I mean, it's just nothing like it. It was just the most incredible thing. They had like the old and the new right next to each other, and it was all pristine. It was all beautiful. It was just amazing.
Favorite holiday?
I don't like holidays. Well, I like holidays. I don't even know, but I don't have a favorite holiday because I don't like literally any holiday, and I'm immediately in rebellion mode. I'm just like, what for? Why? Who started it?
So St. Patrick's Day.
That one.
Is there any food in particular that you hate?
I that's interesting. Nothing comes up right away. I mean, I wouldn't eat a food that I hated, right? Like I'm trying to see if I might like something when I was a kid, but a lot of things I hated when I was a kid, I like now. So I don't know. What do other people say? I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't really have something that I hated either, so I feel you on that.
I said anchovy.
I mean, I love food.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had an anchovy that was right for the moment.
Yeah, I like anchovies.
Like sometimes anchovies are the day. Like I wouldn't keep eating it, but like, it was just like, oh, I see why they did that there.
I like it. Pumpkin spice, yay or nay?
Yay. What? Stop hating on the spices, y'all. I know it's new for y'all, but y'all gotta live in the spice.
Same.
Watch do and you get it. Okay.
Do you cook?
Yes, but if I can avoid it.
Fair enough.
Do you have a favorite place to work?
No, I do now that I know better. I actually like to work when I'm like in between movement and rest. So like I kind of have a space where I feel like I could do both, but any space I feel like I could do both. So I like to go outside a lot, but if I don't feel like there's a outside available, then I'll go to my space because outside's not available when it's cold, y'all. Just so you know. When is it not available? When it's cold, that's not available. Yeah. All right, so but yeah, space to work is mostly just wherever I feel like I can be comfortable.
I get that. All right, last question. What's your ideal Friday night?
My ideal Friday is a movie at home with the best food available at the time. So I love a real meal, but I also love snacks. So if I could like have a real meal that's small enough that I could also snack, that's ideal.
Girl dinner.
Yeah.
Little cheese, slice of lasagna, mini salad, couple of crackers, pizza fruit.
Sounds perfect.
Yes.
I love it.
I love it. I love it. So good. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today and sharing this kind of mind-blowing wisdom. I think you dropped a lot of truth bombs on our audience today. So I expect to hear some feedback. If you have comments, questions, we'll have to have her back on. So send them to us. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And thanks to everyone for listening. We'll see you in the next podcast. Bye for now.
A big shout out and thank you to our sponsors for today's episode, Period Coaching School and Katie Bresek Wellness.
Thanks to you, our favorite bestie, for listening to the Period Besties Podcast, where no topic is TMI. And of course, share this episode with your besties.
Remember to leave us a 5-star review, nothing less than the best for us besties, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can follow us on Instagram at Stasha Washburn and at Katie Bresak, or email us at periodbestiespodcast@gmail.com.
Check out more about us at katiebresak.com and periodcoachingschool.com. And of course, check the show notes for free goodies and extras that support this episode.
We'll see you on the next episode.
Bye for now, besties.